Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, the 8 scariest words in the English language per Ronald Reagan. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Government's rules for restaurants. New York City.
Are they changing again, too?
For more than a month, 2% or fewer of those tested in New York City have been found positive for COVID. Andrew Cuomo, America's governor, nonetheless has refused to allow any indoor dining in the city. Then last week, he declared all alcoholic drinks must now be served with a meal or snack, which gave rise to one restaurant.
De Blasio chips?
No, Cuomo chips.
I mean Cuomo chips, excuse me.
Cuomo chips.
With De Blasio sauce, because I heard that's really good in the summertime.
The mandate is to prevent New Yorkers from congregating and spreading the virus. If you have chips with your beer, then you won't congregate.
It makes everything better.
Well, I don't even.
That extra sodium helps.
I don't. And then there's this, again, COVID-19 helping you. Gilead's antiviral drug, remdesivir. 6 Senate Democrats, including possible VP nominee Elizabeth Warren and Comrade Bernie, just after finishing his manifesto with Joe Biden, said in a letter last week to HHS that the Trump administration acquired its supply of remdesivir at an exorbitant cost in a deal that allows Gilead to reap windfall revenues that are paid by increased premiums for American families. As the Wall Street Journal opines, that's false, but and goes on to dissect it, which is useful. The FDA authorized remdesivir in May for emergency use after randomized trials showed positive results for COVID patients, as we know.
Yeah, it's a great therapeutic drug.
On June 29th, HHS struck a deal with Gilead that gives the U.S. 100% of Gilead's projected production of remdesivir for July, 90% in August and September. Under the agreement, the U.S. government will pay $2,340 per course, the same price as other developed countries. But the U.S. gets its treatments months earlier. Private insurers pay hospitals bundled rates for inpatient treatments. Gilead has set the hospital wholesale rate at $32.50 a course. So $23.40 for HHS, $32.50 for hospitals who are paid by private insurers. The Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, a nonprofit often cited by the left who say drug prices are too high, praised Gilead's responsible pricing decision, quote unquote, suggesting that the drug's clinical benefits would merit a price more like $4,580 to $5,000 per treatment, and between $2,520 and $2,800 after accounting for potential benefits from the steroid dexamethasone, which also has shown some promising results as a therapeutic. Yet Senate Democrats say even though the U.S. government will pay the same price as foreign countries, privately insured Americans will pay $860 more through higher premiums. Never mind that by shortening hospital stays, remdesivir will save insurers, hospitals, and patients thousands of dollars per case, $2,500 a day on average inpatient to hospitalize somebody. And then they went a step further, did Senate Democrats. They also demand HHS invoke legal provisions that allow it to assert control over the production and distribution of remdesivir. They want the government to seize patents for the drugs that result in part from publicly funded R&D, license them to a generic manufacturer for production at a lower cost. So here's the upshot. Gilead develops remdesivir more than a decade ago while exploring potential treatments for hepatitis C and respiratory syncytial virus. While the drug didn't work against these viruses, the NIH has since helped fund in vitro and mouse studies of remdesivir's efficacy against emerging viruses, including Ebola, MERS, SARS, and COVID-19. This is not unusual for NIH to finance such studies of vaccines and treatments for infectious diseases because the success rate is low. Gilead already licensed remdesivir to 5 generic manufacturers at no cost to make and sell in 127 developing countries. Didn't have to do that. Gilead expects its development and manufacturing costs by year's end to exceed $1 billion. As the Wall Street Journal concludes, the threat of drug price controls is bad enough and would result in Americans waiting longer for new treatments, as patients in socialized government-run health systems do now. Many drugs evolve in part from basic research funded by the government. If progressives have their way, every vaccine and drug maker could have to hand over its intellectual property on demand to the government. That would kill innovation, and that innovation that's saving lives of COVID patients as we speak. So that's the left's big plan. Government knows best, including when it comes to the pharma industry, because they're in the business of saving lives. The government is, but the private sector isn't. The innovative sector, the productive sector. Okay. Which is why I found this piece in The Atlantic interesting, particularly because of some of the commentary. The piece by Caleb Watney, who's a resident fellow at the R Street Institute, is about America's innovation engine slowing. And the reasons for that, well, one of the reasons is, and this isn't really tackled here, which is interesting, is the penchant for the government to insinuate itself into the operation of every productive business, much less sector, in the country, including pharma, and the remdesivir couldn't be a more salient example of that which I speak, which is why when President Trump refers to deregulation, just even holding the line on regulations in his first 3 years, which was revolutionary, that is an underappreciated productive thing that this administration has done if you're interested in innovation across sectors. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Caleb Watney, resident fellow at the R Street Institute. Caleb, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
So what about that? You talk about the visa debacle, H-1B visas and so forth, as the latest of many ominous signs for the United States, along the world's primary incubator of new technologies, new drugs, new therapies, new business models. What about the government intervention into the affairs of private enterprise as particularly anti-innovation?
Yeah, no, that can absolutely be a big barrier to innovation. A colleague of mine has coined the term permissionless innovation to describe sort of the legal atmosphere in which you can innovate without having to ask for permission first, and that being a huge boon to innovation. So yes, I certainly think that's a very important factor. Of course, in an op-ed, you can't address every single factor for innovation. And
Understood.
Yeah, so I was trying to focus on three that I felt like were trending in the wrong direction.
To start with this, because this is talked about a lot, and the idea of talent clusters, particularly in urban centers, and as people may begin working remotely or departing from high-density areas like urban centers, those clusters could be broken up, and that may have a deleterious effect on innovation.
For sure, yeah. I mean, one of the most consistent findings by economists who are trying to study the impact of innovation over, the past couple hundred years, really, has been just the huge impact of clusters of smart, talented, ambitious people working in a closely connected sort of geographical location. And we call those agglomeration effects. And the idea is that through a combination of factors, you have spontaneous run-ins of people in different fields. You sort of have late-night conversations that wouldn't have otherwise happened if, they're just happening over Zoom. There's just sort of an atmosphere of creativity that ends up being created. People push each other in ways that they wouldn't have thought. They have conversations they wouldn't have otherwise thought. They meet people they never would have met otherwise. And all of those sorts of spontaneous interactions end up creating new firms, creating new ideas, creating new products that end up pushing out the technological frontier. So in the United States, probably the most well-known example of this is Silicon Valley.
Right.
And one thing I try to make clear in the piece is that some version of these trends has been happening before. So Silicon Valley has been seeing sort of a slow out-migration, a trickle of companies leaving the valley, primarily just because there's not the production of housing that needs to be done. And so housing prices are absolutely exorbitant, and that makes it difficult for new people to move into the valley. So it was sort of already a little bit on the decline, but in each of these three areas, I think we might be seeing a breaking point in one sense or another.
Well,
and so,
sorry to interrupt, but Rich Karlgaard, a publisher of Forbes, and I had this conversation about this very topic, and what he suggested is, well, yeah, that's definitely happening. Some of these clusters are breaking up, but what you'll see, he thinks, is they're just migrating to other places that are more friendly for all kinds of reasons: tax treatment, capital, regulatory environment. And so he said, yeah, I wouldn't take a long position necessarily in Silicon Valley, but I would take a long position on Austin, for example, as a cluster, a talent cluster that's forming and that will be fully formed in the not too distant future. So could it be just migration to other places that are more friendly to these sort of innovators?
It could be. I think it's probably going to be a mix of both. So on the one hand, you are seeing a lot of the big tech companies like Twitter, Facebook, Quora, Stripe have all been moving to permanent remote, or at least they are claiming. They may, reverse that in a couple of years, but at least for the foreseeable future, they're trying to be remote, and they're encouraging their employees to, move out to locations where there are just, much lower housing prices, and they can take advantage of that. And so that's going to be a distribution. Maybe they'll start to cluster somewhere else. Maybe we won't. But I do buy the larger point that I don't think industrial clusters are going away as a phenomenon. They're just too powerful. But I do think that maybe instead of there's no guarantee basically that they stay in the United States. You've already been seeing talent clusters in, say, Canada, like Toronto, have been massively expanding in the past couple of years as they've been trying to make themselves a very welcoming place, both in terms of regulations, in terms of immigration policy, in terms of tax treatment. Similarly, the UK, London is trying to make themselves a pretty fashionable location. Australia has had a pretty good regulatory environment on things like drones. So, while there's a chance they might migrate to Austin, there's also a chance we might just lose them out altogether.
The other thing you point about in terms of incubators of innovation and creative thinkers, university systems suffering through some financial turmoil right now, many directly related to COVID, but some also had financial problems coming into COVID. And is this, again, a time where now you have to have the universities start to rethink what their priorities should be, and maybe they shouldn't be politics on campus?
Maybe. I think what I'm perhaps most concerned about is what happens to their STEM departments. So you're seeing that in departments like computer science, 79% of their graduate students in computer science are international students. It's 81% in electrical engineering. 75% in industrial engineering. So the vast majority of their students in some of these STEM studies are international students who are also huge financial, benefits to them because they tend to pay out-of-state tuition rates. And so I think we're likely to see the cuts. The cuts aren't necessarily going to be coming from the English studies or the critical studies departments. They're more likely to happen in the STEM studies, and I think that's particularly worrying about for innovation purposes.
Yeah, and it's a complicated picture, too, because you also have the problem of land-grant universities that have a responsibility to their residents, the taxpayers who finance them, and consistent with their charter. You have the problem of Chinese nationals that come here to get educated and then are engaged in industrial espionage through things like the Confucius Institutes. So it's just a complicated picture where perhaps just saying, well, we want to attract the best and brightest, and we certainly do, and the old saying about visa being stamped to every graduate degree in STEM, that's nice in theory, but it really becomes an assessment that needs to be made on an individualized basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are certainly concerns about, Chinese industrial espionage. I guess I would have a few points of pushback there. One, we get lots of international students from non-Chinese countries, and outside of China, we really aren't all that concerned about industrial espionage. So if you want to, staple a green card to the diploma of every STEM graduate student who isn't from China, that would still be a major change in policy.
Yeah, that's right.
I think the other thing, I think the other factor is that while Chinese espionage is a concern, and we want to, maybe be doing more rigorous background checks or find better ways of countering that, the majority of graduate students that are coming here from China are not engaged in espionage and end up wanting to stay in the United States. So if you look at AI PhD students as an example, a recent report found that 90% of them end up staying in the United States. And, these people go on to found companies and, work for top companies. And there are isolated events of espionage that we should certainly persecute, but it would be far more damaging for us to cut off the flows of international talent. In some sense, we want to be the location where is so on the cutting edge that everyone is trying to spy on us, rather than being the country that's trying to do the spying, if that makes sense.
No, we're in vociferous agreement. As I said, it needs to be judged on an individualized basis. I mean, for example, the son or daughter of some senior Politburo member of the Chinese Communists is a little bit, should perhaps get more scrutiny than the generic Chinese family that sends their kid here to be educated because their dad or mom or their family's a successful business family or whatever. I mean, it's all about ties. It's not about knocking out all Chinese nationals from being educated here. No, we're in complete agreement about that. The last point you make is sort of connected to this one, which is how we do immigration. And there was a lot of talk in the 2016 campaign about refocusing our priorities for immigrants to this country. And of course, not much has happened there because we're sort of still stuck on DACA and the wall. But speak to the areas of immigration reform you think would be pro-innovation.
Yeah, for sure. So the United States has a long history of basically being the premier destination for top international scientists, for top technical practitioners, in spite of an immigration system that is in many ways not optimized for that. So if you look at, some of the countries with which we're competing, so Australia, Canada, the UK, the UK is actually an interesting example. Just in February, they launched a new visa category called the Global Talent Visa, which is explicitly sort of aimed at this top of the skill set distribution and trying to make it as easy as possible for them to come to the UK. It's an unlimited visa, so anyone who, meets the criteria can come. It's not artificially capped. And they're trying to make it easy basically for the UK to end up being a welcoming destination. As I mentioned earlier, Canada has been putting up billboards in Silicon Valley saying, hey, having trouble bringing in talented workers, come up to Toronto. It's going to be much easier to navigate around those immigration laws there. For the U.S. in particular, we've had a huge number of talented people come here through the university system and end up wanting to stay. But again, there are not very good pathways for them to stay. They can have a hope at the H-1B lottery, but that's a lottery, and so you really don't know if you're going to be able to get it. There's the O-1 visa for extraordinary ability, but in practice that ends up being used to get fashion models and soccer players into the country rather than top international scientists. I'm actually working on a broader policy proposal right now to overhaul the O-1 visa because I think that could be a really promising.
Let's not cut off the flow of models, Caleb. Please.
And talented soccer players
and
baseball players.
Have a little heart, Caleb, for goodness sake.
I will. Well, so the nice thing about the O-1 in particular is that like the Global Talent Visa in the UK, it's actually uncapped. So we can have both the fashion players, the soccer players, and the international scientists.
All right, that's good. It's a win-win. I like it. Caleb Watney, resident fellow at the R Street Institute. His piece in The Atlantic, America's Innovation Engine is Slowing. Appreciate the joining us, Caleb. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
I know that on those tablets Mr. Moses brought down is the commandment to not covet. But I'll confess, my neighbor and his lawnmower is making it tough. He's got this stand-behind, ride-along space shuttle that covers probably 3 times more space than my trusty old lawn boy. So, when we have who mows the fastest races, which are completely fabricated in my head, he has some impressive advantages that I just don't have. It's Ryan, and at our Faith and Family Mortgage team, we're blessed to have a pretty special advantage of our own, and one that could be a big deal for you. Our team is lucky to be an arm of a bigger company that is a direct lender, which means our company gets to use its own money and make its own decisions within its own walls, an advantage that often allows us to get you a better rate, saving you monthly